Happy Tuesday, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Eat, Train, Prosper. Today, Brian and myself have a little bit different of an episode than we normally have. We have a specific special edition coaches Q&A where we took questions from other nutrition coaches, online training coaches, and even I think we have one question from an in-person trainer, and we are going to answer those. So it's going to be a cool little different episode where we get to share a little bit about our expertise just from time spent in this nutrition training, strength training game. Fumbled over my words a little bit there, and take it a little bit different direction than we normally do. But before we get into these questions, Brian, what's the latest?
Yeah, I'm on day 6 recovering from my vasectomy surgery, and I reached out to Instagram yesterday or the day before and asked everyone about their experiences with this procedure because I guess if you listened to last week's episode, I was all gung-ho and confident that I'd be able to start my strength cycle this Monday. Unfortunately, this Monday was day 5 of post-surgery, and I just didn't feel up for it. I was curious kind of at first whether this was just the way it is, or maybe whether I did something to limit my recovery or decrease the rate at which I recover. And then I noted that on Saturday I walked to and from a football game that I went to and ended up accruing like 20,000 steps that day. And so a lot of people were just like, yeah, that probably wasn't smart. And the funny thing about it too is that when I heard stories from people on their experiences, there was so many variations of, people, some guys were like 2 to 3 days and they're like, yeah, back in the gym, everything's good. Other guys were like, still having issues after a month, 2 months, 3 months, things like that. So it was very varied, a little scary as well. And going into my 20,000 step walk, I actually felt really good. So that was day 3. And the large part of me is like, man, if I hadn't done that walk, I wonder if like I would have healed and been okay by day 5 and would have been able to start my strength cycle. But you can't change the past. So I did that 20,000 step day, and I feel like I regressed quite a bit. I would say that the last 2 days feel more like the first 2 days, and finally getting a little improvement again today. So I'm just going to try and, lay low, stay off my feet. And I ended up training yesterday, but it was like some super light circuit work, with like 10 RIR on everything. And it felt really good just to move. But I definitely feel like the prudent move is to at least wait the rest of this week to start the strength cycle the following Monday. And I guess I'll just have to assess and make sure that I'm feeling up for it at that point.
Yeah, have you noticed anything change in or relative to like sleep or anything like that?
Yeah, I've actually been waking up a little bit more, like probably 2 or 3 times a night instead of 1 or 2, which is pretty normal for me. But I don't know that I would say that it's the result of like feeling pain or some sort of distraction down there.
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that my sleep got worse because I've just been eating worse. Like I've been eating a lot of food, later at night. I've kind of reverted back to a lot of like the off-season habits that I have where, I'm not eating as much in the mornings. I'm saving calories for the evening. I'm having like 2,000 calorie dinners. And I think that that's what's affecting my sleep more than the other thing. So it's funny because we always talk about sleep and how when you diet, sleep gets worse. But my sleep was just as good or maybe even better during my diet. And I really think that it had a lot to do with the way that I restricted intake after 6:30 or 7 p.m. So I always had 2 or 3 hours before bed where I wasn't eating, I wasn't drinking water, stuff like that. But when you're eating a bunch of calories at night, you're also drinking a bunch of liquids along with that. And I just think that whole process just made me a little unsettled throughout the night.
Yeah, from what I've found with clients is it's kind of hard to say. I definitely have clients who 100% like can't eat late at night. It 100% affects their sleep. They don't feel good type of deal. And then there's other people, and I find myself in this like latter category. It is regular that I am having my final meal after 9:30 p.m. Like for instance, last night, I now am relegated to training from about 8 to 10 p.m. on Mondays just because of how work and calls line up. So I didn't get home from the gym until after 10 p.m. last night. Had my post-workout meal at like 20-ish, and then I went to bed like 30 some minutes later. That being said, that meal is maybe mid 500s calories. So it isn't a large 2,000 calorie meal like you had said, but I would agree in that I find both sides of the fence with my clients. Some people are a hard no, and other people find it doesn't really change much.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my goal right now, like, so as of yesterday, that is 10 days or 11 days since I stopped my diet. And yesterday was the first day that I would say that I ate like a normal human. Like I literally, I had 2,600 calories and 200 grams of protein and 300 carbs. And it felt like kind of like a dieting day with like a little bit more freedom. And I was talking to Kim about it afterwards, and I was like, this is how I really should be eating. Like I should almost think of my off season as still dieting, but with some additional freedoms, instead of like I tend to flip a switch where I'm like, oh shit, I'm not dieting anymore. Now, like I can eat this and I can eat that and I can bake and I can blah blah and like all these different things. And like last weekend at the football game, I had 5 beers. I haven't had 5 beers in like a 3-hour period. It must have been like a year. I can't even remember the last time I had 5 beers. And so I'm like, half drunk. I felt like I was in college again because I'm like walking through campus, like stumbling through, like walking home, my balls hurt. And I'm like, it's just a mess, So yeah, those types of things, like 5 beers, man, that's a lot of beers. And, it was cool. Like, it was cool to be able to experience that just because I got to get together with a couple guys, do the bro thing, watch some football, tailgate, all that sort of stuff. But it's not something that I feel great making a regular part of my life.
Again, right?
Yeah. So what's up with you, dude? Before you jump into yours, I just want to comment on the beauty of the Utah fall. Because you posted that on your story the other day, and it was all the yellows and the reds and all these colors together, and it was so beautiful. And it made me almost like sad that I don't have the freedom that you have, as in not having kids, to be able to just like do that, where like every Sunday you're just going out on like a 6-hour adventure. Because I would guess that Colorado has similar colors to what you're seeing in Utah. And I see it like occasionally in the neighborhoods and stuff, but the fact that you're able to like hike out there and see this like a vast meadow of mountains, and it's just incredible.
Well, a couple things. So yes, it is incredible. It has been, if you would have told me like a year ago that I wanted to move to Salt Lake City, I would have told you that like, my life had gone a path that I wish it didn't take or whatever. But here I am, like I'm sold. Like I am sold. There will be, we will still travel. There's a couple places we want to see, spend a handful of months in. Idaho is one, the Pacific Northwest. But so far, Utah is leading the charge of where we will eventually relocate to, which I am, over the moon about. It's incredible. The thing is with this, especially the Sundays hike, the nature here is so freaking close to the city. It is insane. And we had a time constraint because we took a class on Sunday. And we couldn't spend like hours out there. We left to go to that hike, did the hike, and we're back in maybe 90 minutes, all round trip.
That's awesome.
And it was like a shorter one. It wasn't like super, super deep into the canyons, but a lot of it's really, really close. And one thing we see a lot here too is people like, there's like adventure families. Like people throw the kids in the whatever they're called, the chest or back thing.
Yeah.
We were on a hike like 2 weeks ago. It was a mom and a dad. There was like maybe like a 5-year-old, maybe like a 3-year-old, and then 2 younger ones. And the younger ones were twins. The mom had one of them in a backpack on her back. The dad had the other one, and then the like 5-year-old and the 3-year-old were running around.
No way, really?
Yeah, people are like,
That's
hey,
crazy.
like, we're taking our family hiking, and then the kids adapt to it. Like I would imagine, here I am without any children telling people how kids and stuff work. Well, obviously, I don't have a clue, but I see it. I see it a lot.
I think the difference is that when you do go hiking with kids, which you can do, but the amount of distance that you can cover is so small that you really have to be very specific with the way that you pick your hikes and how challenging the hike is.
Of course.
So like I did Sanitas with Bryson, and it was just me and him. Like we didn't have Kim or the younger one with us. And he was able to do it, but like he got, 2/3 or 3/4 of the way up, and we sat there and we had lunch at the top of the mountain and we looked out over the views and everything, and it was amazing. but then we had to come back down. And he like didn't want any part of that, because he was like, I accomplished the thing. I'm really tired. I just ate food. I'm in food coma now, whatever a 4-year-old thinks. And he like didn't want to do it. So the whole way down, he was complaining, and like it just made it miserable. So it's one of those things where at 4, I feel like when you said the 3-year-old was walking, that was what surprised me, because I feel like at 5 I can take him and he won't complain as much. But at 3, I'm really surprised that a 3-year-old made that. And then I know the baby at 1.5, like she's, just been walking for 6 months or whatever, and she's walking and she's learning to run and she wants to be active. If I try to put her in a backpack, within 10 minutes, she's screaming and yelling to get on the ground and move. And like when you're on a hike, like you can't have a 1.5-year-old toddling next to you. So,
No.
So for us, unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit more difficult, but I definitely look forward to being able to take Bryson on that. And I'm beyond impressed by the families that are doing that. Like you mentioned, that's crazy.
Yeah, they might be. There was a person, a girl that used to be at the gym. Margot was her name.
Mm-hmm.
Her and her husband, I can't remember his name, unfortunately.
Ash.
Yes. They like from like right when they had their first child, they just started taking them like on adventures. And it was like, so the kids were like conditioned.
That's
for
awesome.
it.
Yeah.
And yeah, now I see on Instagram, they go on like big hikes and backpacking trips and stuff, but it's like, that's what the kids know. Like that's normal to them.
That's awesome.
So maybe that's what this family did as well. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Super cool.
But yeah, I definitely do see it. I think just because like being out, like it's just a big outdoor community and stuff here. But it is really, really cool and gives me hope in the future that hopefully when I do have a family that we can coerce the children to go do what we want to do and not the other
Start
way
it from
around.
a young age. Yep.
Yeah.
So what's going on? What else going on?
Nothing new for me. I officially started my gut protocol now after that first 7-day period. Things are going about as good as I would imagine. The interesting thing with me is it's always just gas, right? There's zero bloating, very, very few incidents of like strange bowel movements or anything like that. It's always just been like a gas thing. So the incidence of that is down. However, I'm still very obviously cognizant about the type of food I'm eating. So I'm following low FODMAP, removing like incidence of carbohydrates, specifically vegetables that have a higher incidence of fermentation, and just trying to kind of run the course there, be diligent, which is pretty easy for me at this point in my life, I would say. Yep. So that's the front there. Training's actually going kind of well, which is cool. It's at 4 days per week. The sessions are a little bit longer, and I've been enjoying micro-loading my movements. And I've also taken a little bit of the double dynamic progression, where I will progress sets independently of each other. So that has been cool. And I'll say like, hey, I want to hit this number. And then I will obviously push the first set usually a little bit harder because I'm fresher. And then the third one might drop 10 pounds, but I want to make sure that my reps don't fall off by like 4 or something like that. So that's been cool. Another thing I guess I will share, I have been taking like a big focus part of my training more seriously. And I've been putting my phone not on airplane mode because I obviously want to have like Spotify, but I put it on focus mode and I can choose which apps will send me notifications and which ones I use a Pixel, so I'm on Android, but they will disable the apps. So I disable basically all social media, email, text, and I just leave like my training apps and Spotify, and that's been really, really good for me. Just from like a mental focus standpoint and making sure that like, let's say I want to have like a 2-minute rest period on like an isolation or something like that. It's actually 2 minutes and not 2 minutes and 25 seconds because I'm like reading some Instagram posts that I want to finish reading or something like that. So that's been really, really helpful, keeping me super laser focused in on training. I've been a big fan of that. It's kind of like a vice thing too, where I like make a hard rule. I'm like, okay, I'm starting my first set, focus mode goes on, and I don't turn it off until I'm like actually finished with my last set. That's been cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, for me, it's been really, really helpful just to kind of be like, okay, this is like it's training time. It's not, because I'm admittedly like guilty. Like I'll respond to clients, in between sets and stuff like that. And then my set ends up being like a 5-minute rest instead of like 2.5 because I want to make sure, I send this diligent message and stuff. And then I get to the point where I'm like, I don't want to be at the gym for 3 hours because my rest times are expending and I'm, fucking off between sets on reading something or going down some rabbit hole. So that's been really, really beneficial for me.
Interesting. Yeah, I actually really enjoy the process of fucking off between sets and doing work. Like I really do look at my training as like a period of time where I can multitask and accomplish things. So I like purposefully save like DMs and Facebook replies and emails for my workout so that I can just use the time I'm at my computer to program. And I purposefully, will answer all those things that are kind of one-offs as a way of kind of utilizing that time between sets. So it's just kind of funny the way people go about it. But I know that if I was doing like a metabolite cycle or something like that, I would have to do that just because metabolite kind of doesn't work if you're resting 5 minutes between sets.
Exactly. So
Yeah, totally. Do you want to jump into these questions?
let's do it.
All right, cool. So Aaron and I each had, I believe, like 4 or 5 questions come through. And so we chose some of the good ones here. And the first one was from a client, or was to Aaron, so I'll ask it for him. How do you help a client better adhere to their macro targets when they don't follow them?
So the first thing I have to say, of course, is it depends. And that, as much as I hate it because it feels like a cop-out, that is ultimately the first thing you have to start with. What I find most common is no one, and especially like maybe you're their first nutrition coach, maybe you're their second or third or something like that. No one previously has like painfully clearly explained to them the path of how the numbers and macros work. So this is something that I find myself repeating like again and again and again. Like one of my clients like follow the macro numbers, like not your calories. And still I'll have someone be like, I'll be like, hey, because I ask people how many days per week they were within like a certain threshold, and they'll give me like a 5, and then I'll look at their food logs, and I'll be like, this is like a 2, and they're like, but my calories are within, and I'm like, no, dude, no, like they'll be like triple their fats, and their protein will be at like 70 grams for the day, and they're like, I hit my targets, and I'm like, you did not even come, you're not even in the fucking ballpark, dude. So the first thing is you have to open up the communication channels because they might have, a preconceived notions from maybe some other education they've had. So open up the communication channels is the biggest thing. Make sure you and them are on the exact same page. Also, I find that with a lot of clients or maybe Gen Pop in general, people understand the concepts like at a high level, but not how they apply to their specific goal in terms of energy metabolism, fuel sources, fuel utilization, etc. So, especially in the context of a calorie deficit, right? So people think like, okay, we're in this deficit period. I'm going to be better than before. I'm using air quotes for people who are listening on podcasts, but don't understand that you need to be consistently under that threshold over a period of time to see, the results there. It's not like I can be good Monday through Thursday, have that, cheat meal every single Friday night that is going to be like, let's say, people go with like pizza or a burger. People can easily eat 4,000 calories at a dinner, especially if they have some alcohol or something like that and not even realize it. If you're only doing like a 400 calorie deficit, like you are immediately wiping that out. So clearly explaining it, I have some like graphs and things I will show to illustrate like this is how this works. And that is what I find has been the most successful. And then also reevaluating goals with them. So everyone loves the idea of fat loss, periodization, and what it provides. The practice and the application of it can be a completely different thing. So people think like, yeah, calorie deficit, I'm motivated, I want to get leaner, etc. And then when it comes time to prep the food on Sunday, or when everyone at work is going to get wings and beer for Friday lunch, and they need to make the decision of like whether they're going to adhere or go do what their coworkers are going to do, that's a little bit of a different story. So just ultimately coming down to open the communication channels, making sure that they understand how the numbers work and the importance of certain numbers, especially how protein is different than carbohydrate and fat because it's not a primary fuel source, is really, really important. So I would start there. And again, lastly, you need to open the communication channel and make sure that they understand what you are trying to say at a deeper level.
Yeah, I certainly agree with all of that. I think the way that I would approach this personally, if they're not following their macros, is I would initially start them with a protein target and then allow them to take their carbohydrates and fats to make up the remainder of the calories, because at least then you know that you're hitting the bare minimum needs, right? And at the end of the day, like oftentimes like you and I both prefer higher carbs than fats, but at the end of the day, it's an individual thing, and personal preference can also play a factor in there as well, as much as the physiology and like how your body responds to it, as well as like what type of training cycle you're in. So I have like very little problem in most cases having people just hit a protein goal and then a calorie goal. And I think that however they want to fill in their fats and carbs is fine, unless maybe you're in like a specific training cycle where there'd be a serious advantage to prioritizing one over the other.
Yeah. The last little thing I will add to that, I do agree with that, especially with like maintenance phases, maybe a recovery diet, reverse diet. In a calorie deficit, the potential downside to that is satiety, because just carbohydrates are going to be more satiating per volume. But other than that, I would agree with that.
Yeah. And then we kind of had a related question from one of my questions. And it was strategies you would take to stop clients from making excuses about why they can't. So this isn't related specifically to macro adherence, but rather just adherence broadly. So I think that it's a difficult question to answer, because I think that the why they can't is going to be very dependent on each situation. Like it's individually dependent upon, why they can't hit their macros, or why they can't work hard enough in the gym on their weights, or why they can't sleep more, or whatever it is. Like I feel like you need to address each individual issue of thing that they struggle with individually, right? Does that make sense?
It does to
What
me,
do
yeah.
Yeah, what do you think? Like, could you answer this question broadly? Because I'm kind of struggling to answer it broadly when it's very dependent on these individual factors.
Yeah, I think I can. I 100% agree. It is individually dependent on individual factors. That being said, this is a psychological issue. It's a psychological and priority issue. And for example, like let's say, well, actually, I should say, I believe it's psychological. I believe it's priority. I also think there is a third very large thing around where is this priority in their life? And do you need to manage your expectations as the coach with the client's expectations? For example, I think the classic example is we have like single mom, two young kids at home. Like she can't be in the gym 5 days per week. Sorry. I don't want to say can't, because there is single moms with two kids who are in the gym 5 days per week. Maybe she is perfectly fine with a much longer timeline, making much slower progress, but being able to be adherent over a longer time with a more realistic protocol for her situation. So that's the first one. Not everyone needs to be tracking their macros, right? Depending on the ambitiousness of their goal. Not everyone needs to be in the gym 5 days per week. I think that is where it kind of starts out at. But then what I would say, but I think that is much less likely. What I believe is much more likely is a psychological and prioritization thing. For example, I will have clients say that like, oh well, we'll be in a calorie deficit, right? And they'll be like, oh well, when I hang out with these friends, like they just expect that I drink, and I'd be like, okay, well, you're 38 years old, you're a grown man, and if you don't want to have alcohol, tell your friends, I'm not having any fucking alcohol because I don't want to. And it's like that simple. And I think that really comes back to a psychological thing. And one for me personally that I know works because I have defeated that personally. Like Brian knows just as well as anyone. Aaron Straker used to be a fucking booze hound, and I loved every single second of it. And then one day I just decided that I didn't want to do it anymore. And I haven't had any alcohol in over a year and a half. And I do not ever plan on having any more. And it's been just because I don't want to. And I've been to weddings, I've been to parties, I've been to these things. And I just tell people, like, yeah, I don't drink anymore. And no one is going to pressure you on that. And if they really are like good friends of yours or anything like that, they will 100% accept that.
I agree. I think that the difficult part there, because I've been through this transition as well, as you know, is that it's not that the people like don't want to be your friend anymore if you're not drinking, but there's such like a history there, right? And like the guy, like you're in your example, there's like the expectation of like, these are my friends, they expect me to drink, whatever, whatever. I get that. You can say no. Here's the part I struggle with though, is that if you're around a bunch of people drinking and you're not drinking, it's not really that fun. Like, they kind of come across like a little disgusting, and you kind of feel like when you're talking to them that there's not really value in what you're talking about because they're probably not going to remember most of it anyways. And like, you just kind of don't even really want to be in that situation anymore. So then I guess you have a bigger question of like, are these people like people I really want to be friends with or whatever? But I think that that's difficult because like you have a history with these people, right? Like, it would be like I know Driscoll has changed himself and stuff like that, but if we use like Driscoll as an example, like imagine Driscoll never grew up and that he was still like, you know, getting wasted just like you were, but those were like your boys, like you hang out with them, and like when you get together with them, like you guys want to have fun, like you want to do the things, and it's kind of, it's almost sad to like feel like your friendships are diminishing with these people because of this, and that's not your fault, it's not really their fault, it's just kind of like a thing that happens because life is moving in a separate direction. So it's just tough, and like I empathize. I don't know what the solution is, but I definitely empathize with the people that are going through that, because I won't say lost friends, like no one necessarily like, you know, doesn't think I'm their friend anymore, but I hang out with people less that I used to hang out with, and so yeah, I guess in some ways the relationship is diminished in a little bit, you know.
I would agree with that. I feel very similar. And I don't want to go down too far of a tangent here. Something that I have really prioritized, I guess, in my own life in the last like year or two is how I value my time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know this can be something that can kind of come up in between, like, you know, partners in a relationship or something like that. But this was always a big one for me because something that was really hard for me. I was like, oh, we're going out. It's my roommate's best friend's 28th birthday party and we're going to somewhere. And I'm like, I just like, you know what? I'm not fucking going because I just don't want to go. I don't care to be around those people. I value my time doing something I care about rather than something I don't. And that is something that can be unfortunately kind of difficult to make with certain things with friends, but you may reach that point in your life where I value my time and I'm just not going to spend it doing something that I don't feel adds value to my life at this point.
Totally. No,
And that really comes back to priorities, which is kind of what we said for handling that question.
Yeah, and then just to add one last little piece of context on that question, I think that when the question is why they can't, maybe the answer is what can I do as a coach to meet them halfway or part way. So if it's like, you know, I just cannot sleep more than 5 hours a night, then it's like, okay, what can we do to get you to 6 hours a night? Or if it's like, you know, I just can't get to the gym 4 days a week. Okay, well, what can we do to make sure that you go 3 days a week? Or like, you know, so there's like steps you can take that meet them halfway that allow them to still get really close to achieving optimality or closer to achieving optimality. And in the grand scheme of things, like if you're sleeping 6 hours instead of 7 hours, it makes a difference, but it's not going to be a huge difference. Like, it's way better than sleeping 5 hours versus 7 hours. And, you know, there are people that get their as close as possible to their genetic potential training 3 days a week as they would training 4 or 5 days a week. It really is, it comes down to many more variables than just whether you're training 5 days a week or 3 days a week. So I think there's a lot of ways you can meet people halfway and kind of help them, nudge them in the right direction. And as they get closer and closer to it, maybe they start taking some of that onto themselves and continue moving forward on their own from there.
Yeah, I really like that. What I will refer to those as like your big rocks, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say someone can't track their food consistently, but their diet is like a 100% high quality, whole nutrient dense foods. Like, that's a big rock. Like Brian said, sleeping, that's a big rock. Training 3 days per week, that's a big rock. Like, that person should still be able to make progress. Yep. Maybe not optimal rates of progress, but still progress.
Yep. Cool. Do calories need to be reduced on days that you aren't training to maintain a deficit? So I guess the goal is to maintain a deficit So because you're expending less calories, should you be eating less?
It depends. I hate using that.
It always
I know.
depends.
So the interesting thing in this question is the wording, right? Do calories need to be reduced? Of course, they do not need to. If you are maintaining a deficit and you don't want to have high and low days or cycling days, just choose a deficit across the board that will allow you to achieve that deficit over the period of the week or something like that. Are there advantages to having high low days? If someone, let's say someone has no problems tracking their food and they're really adherent already, I think there are. I will always choose that when given the option with a client. That is the option I choose for myself because I think it allows for more flexibility and variety in your diet. But do they need to be reduced on training days versus non-training days? Absolutely not.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that personally, I tend to go with one additional bolus of food on training days, and that usually just means that I'm eating slash drinking would be the answer. Drinking during my workout, where I usually wouldn't have that workout, so I have no reason to drink that protein shake. So it really is just a small, like it's 30 grams of protein and 25 grams of carbs is what I was doing on my diet. And so that's like 220 calories that I would have additional on a training day. And then to be honest, like I probably also have maybe 2 extra pieces of fruit on training days. So there's another like, 30, 40 grams of carbs, which is 150 calories or something like that. So maybe it's like 300 to 400 calories higher on a training day. But the majority of the other meals will stay the same, and it's just about feeding the workout window.
Yep. And I think, well, something Brian briefly alluded to is keeping the structure of your days as similar as possible. And that's just to create consistency and hunger signaling and stuff like that with your body. And when those are consistent, that makes adherence more streamlined.
Yep. So we have 2 questions on blood work. First one was, do you have clients take blood work always or only in special cases?
So I have reached a point now where I always try and get blood work. I have really a cornerstone of my coaching from the beginning has been on metrics, data, and objectivity. And the more information we have, the better informed decisions we can make. Now, as a coach, there is the massive learning curve to reading and interpreting blood work, which is a big commitment, but it can really help influence your decisions. Now, the one thing I do want to say is they're an addition. They are not like a law or a rule. Example here. Personally, my thyroid level, my thyroid numbers have never come back optimal. And this has been, there was when I was 225 pounds, my thyroid numbers weren't optimal. And now I'm, 191 pounds, my thyroid numbers are not optimal. If you were just kind of looking at something and, I'm using air quotes here, but diagnosing, you can't diagnose anything unless you're a doctor, obviously. Straight from blood work, you might be like, oh, wow, this person has, maybe subclinical hypothyroid or something like that. We need to get them on, a ton of selenium, tyrosine, iodine, something like that to help, up regulate their thyroid function. But if that person, like for myself, I've never had any issues dropping fat, getting very lean, the kind of blood work, and even though those numbers are not optimal, doesn't really translate to practicality or real life application. I do not have much issue dropping body fat when I decide to. So kind of circling back, I am now always trying to push for blood work, especially when clients will get it. Oftentimes I find people are excited to learn and see. I will do a very thorough blood work review. And then for any clients that do have some, always ask them, tell them to get the hard copy themselves, because 9 times out of 10, the client is going to maybe get a phone call from their doctor's secretary and say, they said everything is fine. But like fine is a massive scale, and oftentimes things can be very far from optimal. Always tell, wherever you get your labs from that you want the hard numbers yourself. I generally recommend just ordering them third party, paying out of pocket. It is not very expensive. Oftentimes, oftentimes I should say, or I did say, but I have had clients who have really cool doctors who will order them like basically anything they want. So it is pretty cool to see that there are some really sweet doctors out there that are fighting for their clients, or their patients, I should say. Order what you want when you want it. I have had doctors push back on me, tell me things like, "Oh, I'm young, I don't need to see my testosterone levels. Oh, it's summer, your vitamin D will be fine." And it came back in the 30s. So just push back, and if you want something, just know that you can always go order it somewhere else, oftentimes cheaper than what you're going to pay for it from the doctor anyway, which is mind-boggling, but the truth.
What are the markers that you look for the thyroid that you mentioned?
So that's going to be TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. We want to see a free T3, which is your active form of thyroid. We want to see free T4, which is inactive. That is what gets produced by the thyroid gland, and then it gets converted to T3. And then we also want to see reverse T3, because reverse T3 is another form of inactive. Generally, if stress is really, really high, the body will convert that T4 into reverse T3 as opposed to T3. And then it's also good to see your TPO, I think it's TPO-AB, which is going to be antibodies. If these are elevated, that can be indicative towards Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And then there's one other one that I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's also related to, I think it's like thyroid anti-globulin or some globulin. It's related to autoimmunity as well, potentially linked with thyroid. But those are honestly much more common with women than men. But if you really want to get the Cadillac suite for thyroid, those are everything. In many cases, when you go to a doctor or something like that, they're only going to order TSH, which is literally just the tip of the iceberg. And you want to at least, I would say at a bare minimum, get TSH, free T4, free T3, and reverse T3.
Yeah, I have all of those. The only one that's off is reverse T3 is a little bit high.
Yeah, and that's generally, is your serum cortisol high as well? What was that at? I think that should be on there.
No, cortisol was 12, and the range was 6 to 19.
Okay, yeah, so that's not bad. It could just be because that is one that would make sense to be. You're in a diet. You've been dieting for a while, and it's kind of putting the brakes on, because you don't just want to be pissing fat and weight off as you've been kind of controlled starving yourself for 5 months type of deal.
Cool. Well, that's interesting.
Yep.
All right, and then the second question related to blood work was, do you use metrics like blood pressure or blood glucose to determine a client's protocol?
So I would say not so much to determine a client's protocol, because everything that I am going to be doing with clients is going to be for optimizing blood pressure and blood glucose anyway. That being said, those are things that can change what we are doing when they get out of whack. So let's say someone comes to me and they're like, "Hey, we're going through a gaining period. They want to put some size on and eat more." And their blood glucose comes back really high, north of the 100s, 110s. Their fasting insulin is high too. There's no way we're going to continue into that, because it's only going to get worse. And one thing that I am very big on is I'm not going to take anyone through a physique-related protocol at the cost of their health. So I would rather 100% lose the client than take them through something that I don't morally agree with based on where they're at. So blood glucose is one. It's really easy to monitor. You can buy the home kits off Amazon for $30, see where you're at. If you want to get the blood test, it's also stupid cheap. It's $30 from Life Extension to go get some labs drawn here. Blood pressure is another one that's really important to pay attention to, especially because it's linked to basically one of the number one killer of Americans, right? CBD. And you will find people who are seemingly young and healthy who have elevated blood pressure. Again, this is very, very linked to stress levels and cortisol, and then it will impact other parts of what you're doing with them as a nutrition coach. For example, I have a client, super great dude, has some family history with with CBD stuff, and then also very high stress job, rough patch earlier this year with life, and his blood pressure is pretty high. Doctor has him on a calcium channel blocker, right? Which, of course, doctor can do whatever they want. However, calcium channel blockers are notorious for making you constipated, right? So then he's bloated all the time, won't have bowel movements every single day. Maybe it's a handful of days before he has one. This will 100% affect your outcomes with nutrition. So understanding these things and then learning, okay, well, now that we're constipated, what are some things we can do to help get things moving again so the client can have some relief, not feel that way? And then also, what are some big lifestyle practices we can work on to get this blood pressure down naturally so that we can send the client to go talk to their doctor about getting that calcium channel blocker dosage reduced and hopefully eventually removed, so then we don't have to jump through these hoops for the digestion stuff and get them back to just a more holistically whole, great place to be in as a human.
Yep. I don't have anything to add on that.
Cool.
One more question for you here. How do you get rid of bloating and digestion issues caused by a high protein diet?
So I love the wording in some of these questions because it's pretty interesting. So if, right? It's a big if here. If this is actually caused by a high protein diet, well, then you need to reduce protein. It's pretty self-explanatory here. Simple as that. And I would say I find like 80 to 90% of my clients who are having digestion issues, an overwhelming majority, it's due to whey concentrate protein powders and other forms of dairy. Not so much like, cheeses and stuff, or maybe some like Greek yogurt, but people will be doing like, Muscle Tech whey protein still, and it's like a whey concentrate, and they're super bloated and gassy and stuff from it. We pull that, they generally do a little bit better. So that is technically, not even technically, that is protein related. But let's say someone is doing maybe a plant-based protein powder, and we know it's not their protein powder, and it's specifically like a high protein diet that is causing their bloating and digestion issues. It's probably more indicative towards a lower capacity of the GI in general. And why the protein could be exacerbating this is because protein is the hardest to digest. We get a lot of benefit from this thermic effect of feeding when dieting, etc. But if you are pushing a high volume of food through your GI and you are having issues, maybe there is some motility issues, maybe you have a little bit of bacterial overgrowth or something like that, higher protein can exacerbate this because of just the sheer volume of work it requires to digest the protein. You need to pull the protein back. So pull the protein back, see if that addresses it. And then maybe if it is not addressing it, you need to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what specific foods may cause it. If there are specific times, if it could be stress related, there's really a can of worms with digestion here. But to answer the question, if it is truly caused by a high protein diet, you need to reduce protein. Simple as that.
Cool. Yeah, I would say the only other thing maybe to think about would be eating less protein at each feeding and maybe spreading out your feedings a little bit more. Like if you're struggling, like maybe the issue is you're eating 2 or 3 protein feedings a day, so you're eating like 70 grams of protein per meal. Maybe try eating 30 to 40 per meal and see what happens.
That's something I generally would recommend as well. And that's something I find that a lot of people by like nature do the opposite of. People have massive meals, like 2 to 3 massive meals per day. And it's just harder when you're putting in a whole grip of it at once, especially if you have maybe lower stomach acid or something like that. So just by having a higher feeding, spreading them out a little bit further can benefit there.
Yeah, I mean, I never had, like, when I was dieting the whole 4.5 months, except on maybe occasionally on like a refeed day, I would end up with like very minor bloating issues. But it's definitely something that in the last week and a half since my diet ended, I've experienced a lot more of, given, those 2,000 calorie meals and stuff. So I think meal size plays a huge role in it. And I would guess that meal size is even more of an issue than the protein itself.
Likely, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially if they're quality protein sources. Like if your client's doing lean cuts of beef, fish, etc., it's probably not that. But if they're doing protein bars and like RTD, low quality whey concentrates and stuff, that's probably what it is.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, Brian, some of these are going to be kicked over to you. This first one is, do you use accumulation and intensification phases in your training design?
Yeah, so I think that terminology, accumulation and intensification, is a little bit more specific to performance sport. The first time that I came across that terminology was when I went through OPEX in like 2012, 2013. That was kind of how they described the way in which they build, like a 10-week cycle that prepares you for peaking. And then I've heard a lot of the same terminology in powerlifting as well. And essentially, the idea of accumulation is that you're accumulating fatigue and volume. They kind of go hand in hand. The more volume you do, the more fatigue you accumulate. But because there's this fitness fatigue spectrum where you have some fitness and you have some fatigue, and your ability to perform is a matter of how much the fitness is higher than the fatigue in your ratio, right? So essentially what's happening in the accumulation phase is your fitness is improving, but you're also accumulating a ton of fatigue, which makes it really difficult for you to demonstrate fitness. So then you have this intensification phase, and usually in a performance sport, the intensification phase is usually like a testing period, and it usually involves significantly lower amounts of volume where there isn't going to be as high fatigue. So like if someone was really trying to peak for say like a CrossFit event or a powerlifting event, you would probably have like a deload week or a taper week before the intensification, because the intensification would essentially be like your testing. In hypertrophy, we don't exactly do it the same way. So I think that you could definitely skew it to use those terms if you wanted to. But essentially what you're doing is you're accumulating a lot of the time in hypertrophy. Like you're accumulating. And then when you've accumulated so much that your fatigue is too high, you deload so that you can accumulate some more. Intensification, given that it's, kind of the testing period or whatever, I would consider that in hypertrophy training to be essentially like your competition. So in the same way that these accumulation and these intensification periods are applied to performance sport, they can't exactly be applied to hypertrophy. Like even in a hypertrophy, even if you're using like an N1 model where you have the different phases, you could call the hypertrophy period like an accumulation period. And then maybe you go into like a neural or a strength phase, but I wouldn't call those neural or strength phase intensification, because you're not going into those phases with the intent to like set PRs or anything like that. You're going into those phases strictly as a way to decrease fatigue so that you can go accumulate some more. So to answer the question, in a hypertrophy client, I don't use those phases at all. But if I'm training somebody for strength, specifically like a power lifter, or I'm training someone like a CrossFit athlete, functional fitness athlete, obstacle course racer, any of those types of things, then absolutely you have an accumulation phase. You get really tolerant at accumulating volume and fatigue and working through it. And then you drop the fatigue, you test, deload, and kind of move on and repeat. So in my opinion, that process is not something that is used in the same way in a hypertrophy program.
I would agree with that, and I do not have much to add.
Cool.
Kick this one over to you again. How do you get a client to drop pounds when they have a dad bod and are sedentary due to being in meetings all day?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the simple answer is that you have to control it with calories. Like if you can't move, you just have to eat less. I don't exactly know if it's like that much more complicated than that. Like there are for sure habit things that you can do within your life beyond just dropping calories. Like I would for sure encourage this person to get up and move around for 5 or 10 minutes each hour, or 10 or 20 minutes every 2 hours, or like whatever frequency you can get a break from your meetings. I would just get up and move around. I honestly don't have a whole lot to add beyond that simple answer. What do you think?
This is one of those questions that I like. So this question is obviously framed the way it's framed, but the initial thing that so much of us think about is like, okay, we have this question, let's solve it with, science type of thing or whatever. Okay, well, they're sedentary, we need to reduce calories. But we know, and I think that's a very fine approach, but we know that's going to, so many people have such an adherence problem where reducing calories is only going to exacerbate this. To me, it seems like they are sedentary due to being in meetings all day because they're not taking control of their schedule. Now, granted, with jobs and stuff like that, you are obviously not going to have complete flexibility, but maybe we're going to tell this client, hey, I want a 15-minute walk right in the morning when you wake up, and I want a 15-minute walk immediately after dinner. Take the kids with you, take the wife with you, carry the kids. Perfect. Well, weight vest, 15 minutes, right? Carry the kid. Block out a time on your schedule where you're not going to accept meetings type of thing. Maybe that is at 12 noon for lunch or something like that. And you spend 15 minutes eating your meal. You spend the next 15 minutes going on a walk type of thing. That is something that I think with, boundaries, especially in today's work environment, you will get kind of walked all over if you don't set them. And it might just come back to this person may want to practice setting boundaries with work because, let's face it, if I'm at work, right, let's say back when I had my software job, right, if I'm at if I have meetings from 9:30 a.m. to 3 p.m., I'm not going to take one. I'm going to literally decline it. And then if someone wants to bring it up, there's laws against things like that, right? I'm going to take my lunch or something like that. I'm not going to sit in meetings for 6 hours straight and be starving and miserable and sedentary because I'm just not going to do it. So I think how I would answer that comes back to one, setting boundaries, taking some time for yourself. And then if you need to, you stack on either end of it with morning and evening. And it doesn't have to be long. Like I said, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes at night.
Yeah, I don't think that 15 minutes morning and night changes the total amount of caloric expenditure much throughout the day. So I don't know if we get to the solution of solving the dad bod issue with 30 minutes of walking. But I know this dude and I'm pretty damn sure that he's at least getting in his weight training sessions. So my first inclination is just to be keep lifting, move as you can, like Aaron described, get those 15 minutes in on either side, mostly for health, not to solve your dad bod problem. Agreed. Solving the dad bod problem, in reality is yeah, there's some boundary issues with work, like Aaron said, but if you're lifting and you're getting in your 3 sessions a week and you're eating decently, the dad bod should take care of itself. I really struggle to believe that this doesn't just come down to nutrition. And I know that is the simple kind of cop out answer of you just need to eat less or whatever. But I just don't understand how it doesn't come down to that. If you have excess fat on you and you're lifting weights, then you either need to move more, and if that's not possible, you just need to eat less. And that's sciencing your way to solving the dad bod.
I agree with that. Yeah, I was speaking more towards increasing your sedentary lifestyle. But
for sure, then you're not as sedentary.
Yeah, but you are 100% correct. If you're training 3 times per week and you're walking, let's say 30 minutes per day, just not cardio, right? Just general activity type thing, it's your diet. And you need to just eat a higher quality diet and probably increase your volume of satiating foods, fruits, vegetables, etc., lean meats, which will, like Brian said, get you less caloric intake, 9 times out of 10, more total volume of more food, less calories, and will start solving your dad bod problem. It's nutrition.
Yep. Cool. We got one question left. This is actually an interesting one. So this person is training clients in person and they want to start online and they're wondering how they should get started. So I think this is a really cool question. Do you have something to say real quick before?
I was going to say I should have read this one because I don't have much.
You don't have anything to add? No. So I actually didn't have anything either. And then I was thinking about it before the show and I was like, okay, what am I going to say here, right? And so I was trying to come up to be solution oriented. So what I was thinking is if you want to move your current training clients that are in person online, a really simple way to do that is to take a client for a number of weeks until you feel like they're relatively proficient in movement, to the point where you're now basically just a rep counter and someone to talk to, and you're not really someone that's actually helping them execute better movement, right? And then you say, hey, you're currently training with me 3 times a week for $100 a session, that's $1,200 a month. Wouldn't it be really cool if you could get the same program for $250 a month? And they'd be like, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I'd be like, cool. All right, here's what we're going to do. You're going to show up at the gym at the same time. I'm just not going to be here with you, but I'm going to deliver you this rad program each week. And you'll have a check-in form and like blah, blah, blah. And you go through the whole process of like, here's what you're going to get with online training. So not only is it 10% of the cost, but we'll have these weekly check-in forms. We'll still have communications. We'll make sure that, you can still submit execution technique videos, and I can analyze your movement if there's anything you're struggling with, right? So I think giving them this opportunity to pay less money but still get the value, and if you start transitioning these people that are in-person clients to online, well, now you've opened up more space for you to take on another in-person client that could eventually convert to an online client, and you've began building your reputation as an online coach, and the clients that go from in-person to online will eventually start telling other people like, hey, you don't have to go to this personal trainer and pay $1,200 a month. I have this dope coach that's doing it for a tenth of the price, and I'm still getting great results and getting a great program from it.
Yeah, one thing I really like that you brought up was specifically saying the word value. And that is something that I come back to so often. It's value stacking here, showing them how they can get more value from this online coaching versus being in person. And I really, really also like, Brian, what you said is like designing like a program, right? For this coach asking this question where you start in person because you need to drill movement patterns, right? Exercise execution, all of these things that are harder to do from watching videos and stuff and not getting that, human tangible feedback in person. And then after a certain period of weeks, you transition to where their movement is proficient, their exercise execution is sufficient into online. And I really, really like that answer. I kind of was, joking in the beginning. I never trained anyone in person. I started my business directly online and I went in that route. And what's interesting is I have gotten better with this, but the real reason is like I had for a really long time just a lot of social anxiety that I didn't do well with, especially people I didn't already know in person. And that was very, very difficult for me. And just the thought of training people and in person and stuff was like nauseating to me. So by removing the in-person part, I would be able to do the job much better. And it's, it was just kind of my business design from the start, but I have gotten better through with that.
One of my least favorite parts of actually training people in person was having to manufacture that like facade of conversation. It's not like I don't care about the person, but like having to constantly like come up with conversation to fill gaps is just like exhausting, man. By the end of a day, like 4 to 6 clients, you're just like, I just want to go home and watch SportsCenter and not talk to a soul, So that definitely, like, I think online has a lot of benefits in that way. And I do think that one of the coolest parts, though, of moving from someone that's in person to online is going to be that the client already feels comfortable with you as a person and knows you as a person. So I think that that's, like, honestly one of the bigger battles that you come across as an online coach. Like, yes, people have followed me and followed my stories and heard me on podcasts and stuff. So in a way, they feel like they know me. But we haven't like had that relationship built that I think instills a bit of confidence into the client.
Yeah, there is that kind of that potential facade of like, are they going to ghost me? Am I going to get some BS generic off the shelf thing that isn't for me? And don't get me wrong, a lot of coaches do this shit, but in this day and age, you should be able to spot that stuff from like consults and that sort of thing. But yeah, I do agree with that. The starting in person and shifting, you're building that relationship better from the start, especially if you are like a personable type of person and can hold conversation and stuff. That will be fantastic. If I were to do that, I would probably honestly do worse.
So here's what I would do, dude. Like whenever I would be like, I don't know what to talk about, I would just start talking about training. Like I'd be like, okay, like I you really could improve your technique here, or like, here's why we're doing, sets of 10 to 15 instead of 6 to 10 or whatever. Like I would just find some way to kind of talk about training because it's an easy gap fill. But yeah, it's definitely, it's just uncomfortable talking to new people in general, like even at parties, not drinking. So this is going back to like our earlier conversation. I find it way harder to like meet new people and make new friends without drinking. And I think that was something, maybe it is a small bit of social anxiety or whatever, but it was definitely easier when alcohol's involved than when alcohol's not involved. That social lubricant, you know.
I would 100% agree with that.
Cool.
Anything
Well, I don't
else on
have
this
anything
one?
else today.
Okay, cool. So just to wrap up, I mean, I really like this episode. I thought it was really, really cool to do something different, get some questions directly from other coaches. I know I'm starting to take more clients on that are other coaches, and I really, really do enjoy that because we get to go a little bit deeper. You know, we get to do things like testing blood glucose, reading labs, and incorporating, you know, different protocols and stuff. So I love this stuff. So I would love to start doing more of that. So we'll probably, I would imagine, do some more of these special edition Coaches Q&A episodes. So when we do, please send your questions and we will do our best to answer them. Anything else from you, Brian?
If you guys are coaches and you're listening to this episode, like, you don't even have to wait for a Q&A box. Like, feel free to shoot either of us a DM or post it on the Eat Train Prosper Instagram page or whatever. And as always, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or whatever your preferred podcast platform is, and we appreciate you.
Okay, real quick before we end. I think Apple Podcasts is the only one you can leave a review.
Oh, really? Okay,
yeah. But what's wild is when I look at the stats, it's overwhelming. I want to say I think it's like 87% of all listens are through the Apple Podcasts app.
Wait, on our podcast?
Yeah.
I swear that I looked at this a couple months ago and it was like 50%.
No, it's higher. I'm almost positive it's significantly higher. I'll double check right after the call.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
But, okay. Anyway, thanks for listening as always, guys. Brian and I will talk to you next week.
Bye-bye.